Today we're going to learn about the skeletal system. Parts of the skeletal system are the bones, which is the skeleton itself, your joints where the bones meet, cartilages, which are cushioning between the bones, ligaments, which are the connective tissue that attach bone to bone. The skeleton is divided into two divisions, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. In a couple slides, we will see diagrams of axial and appendicular skeleton, and they'll be described. The functions of your bones are to support the body, to protect the soft organs underneath the bones, a movement due to the attached skeletal muscles, storage of minerals and fats, and blood cell formation. There are 206 bones in the body. There are two basic types of bone tissue. Compact bone, which are homogeneous, which means the same throughout. And they're the little circular areas on the outside of the diagram. Spongy bone are needle-like pieces of bone that have sharp edges, but there's openings within the bone so that blood vessels and nerves can travel through them. Classification of bones based on their shape. There is a long bone, for example, like the humerus in your upper arm. Short bones, such as the carpals of your wrist. Flat bones, such as a piece of your skull, called the parietal bone. And irregular shaped bones, such as your vertebrae or your backbone. So in the classification of bones, let's discuss long bones first. They're typically longer than wide. They have a shaft with a head at both ends. They contain mostly compact bone. For example, the femur, your leg, has the longest bone in your body, and the humerus is in your upper arm. You can see the diagram. Epiphysis is on each end of the bone, and the center portion of the bone is called the diaphysis. When you look at short bones, they're generally cube-shaped. They contain mostly spongy bone, and the examples of types of short bones are the carpals of your hand and the tarsals of your feet, all those little bones in the mid portion of this foot. Flat bones are thin and flattened. They're usually curved. Thin layers of compact bone around a layer of spongy bone. So examples on this slide show you the skull, the ribs, and the sternum, and they're labeled in the pictures. So irregular bones have an irregular shape, and they don't fit into other bone classifications. Examples of irregular type bones are vertebrae and hip. Stapes is the smallest bone in the body, and that's found in the ear. On the surface of bones, there are sites of attachments for muscles, tendons, and ligaments. And there's also passage areas for nerves and blood vessels. The categories of bone markings are projections and processes, which grow out from the bone surface, or depressions or cavities, which are indentations. And the diagram up in the corner shows you different projections and processes and depressions or cavities. When you have change in the human skeleton, we talk about from development through the years. In embryos, the skeleton is primarily hyaline cartilage. During development, much of this cartilage is replaced by bone. Cartilage remains in isolated areas in the bridge of your nose, parts of your ribs, and your joints. On the topic of bone growth, the epiphyseal plates allow for growth of the long bone during childhood. New cartilage is continuously being formed. Older cartilage becomes ossified, and then the cartilage is broken down and the bone replaces the cartilage. So in this x-ray, you see that the epiphyseal plate is down at the bottom of this tibia bone, and this is where the process of where the older cartilage is becoming ossified and then becoming bone itself. Bones are remodeled and lengthened until growth stops. Bones change shape somewhat and they grow in the width. So age of bones growth stopping in females, it's usually around 17 or 18 years old. In young males, it's usually around 21 or 22 years old. There are different types of bone cells. We have osteocytes, which are mature bone cells, osteoblasts, which are bone-forming cells, osteoclasts, which are bone-destroying cells, which also break down bone matrix for remodeling and the release of calcium. Bone remodeling is a process by which osteoblasts and osteoclasts are being utilized. So here is the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton broken down. You can see that the axial skeleton includes the head, the trunk, and the neck, and that is the orange color in this diagram. And the appendicular skeleton is the upper limbs, the lower limbs, the pectoral girdle, and the pelvic girdle, and that is represented with green in this diagram. These labeled bones you are going to be responsible for, and you'll be receiving a handout of this diagram so that you can study them, because you're going to have a quiz on the skeletal bones this week. So how do your bones change over your life? As your life continues, you tend to decrease in height at about age 30. We're not saying a dramatic decrease, but a slight decrease. Your calcium levels in your bones fall. Your bones become brittle. Osteoclasts outnumber osteoclasts, so that means that bone destruction is taking place greater than bone production. Spongy bone weakens before compact bone. And then bone loss is very rapid in menopausal women. That means women who no longer have their menstrual cycle. Hip fractures become more common, and vertebral compression fractures become more common. So we're talking about some of these concepts later in life. Even though you might see a slight decrease in height at about age 30, some of these other topics or concepts that we're talking about take place much later in life. There are different types of fractures that we're going to be looking at. With a case study, we're going to see these come up again. We have green stick fracture, fissured, comminuted, transverse, oblique, and spiral. Green stick fracture is incomplete, and the break occurs on the convex surface of the bend in the bone, usually with children. A fissured fracture involves an incomplete longitudinal break. A comminuted fracture is complete and fragments the bone. A transverse fracture is complete and the bone breaks at the right angle with the axis of the bone. An oblique fracture occurs at an angle other than the right angle of the axis of the bone, and a spiral fracture is caused by the twisting a bone excessively. This is the end of the presentation. We will see more information about the types of fractures, and we will also be given a handout to review the bones that are labeled so that you can study them and take a quiz later this week.